piece and a puzzle. I'm sorry, I manage a $10 million corporation. You want me to, like, pick out the thing that's wrong in this picture?
Which IT thing is wrong in this picture? That's the password on a sticky note on the monitor. There's nothing wrong with that. All right, well, I will go ahead and get started. So welcome, everyone, to our IT planning for 2026. Rather than doing this in December when everyone's checked out after Thanksgiving and before the holidays really take over for the time off and everyone's already looking for a break that the colder weather has started to set in, we're getting started early here, planning smarter and spending better, specifically on the IT front. I know recently at a conference I was just at in October, the major keystone presentation was for doing year-end planning and goal setting, which is a little better to do than New Year's Day. And so we are doing the same for our IT, for really being able to dive in and evaluate whether things are doing what we think they should be doing. And this goes really for any business process that you might have, but given that I'm well versed in IT, we'll stick with IT. So I'm planning for 2026. 2025 was quite an uncertain year. Between AI coming for everyone's jobs, the T word tariff, and a whole lot of other weird things going out in the world, 2025 was a weird year. And overwhelmingly, the feeling is that I got is, again, borrowing from my favorite source, the Farnham Street blog. And one of the mental models is the Red Queen effect of having to sprint faster and faster just to stand in the same place. It comes from Alice in Wonderland. And, the idea is that Alice is with the Red Queen and Queen jumps up and suddenly says, "Quick, we must go, we must hurry." They sprint as fast as they can as everything zooms across them. Then they stop and they're exactly where they started. So we're doing pretty much the same thing as we're doing more work to keep the same amount at the end of the day. But inflation is eating what it is that we keep. So speaking of that conference I was at, one of the things they had presented this year was from Greg Crabtree, the author behind Simple Numbers. His accounting firm has a basket of sample companies. He calls it the 100 company model. And they track a couple different metrics for different companies. So as you can see here on the chart, this is the aggregate data of all those 100 companies added together. The top line, the blue one, which is revenue, is doing what it's supposed to do, going up and to the right without any major, dips down. But then we can see that costs of labor are rising at a slightly gentler slope, and that the non-labor operating expenses is increasing at a very similar slope. Well, you'll notice that the net operating income, that yellow line down the bottom, went up a little bit for the middle of 2021 and has gone nowhere, meaning that top line revenues are going up, folks are doing more. Sure, labor costs are increasing, non-labor operating expenses are increasing, but everything else is just going up. And so we're doing more work, generating more revenue to net income the same amount back. And these numbers are not inflation adjusted. And given that the first month of the chart is June of 2020, and we've had incredible inflation in the past 5 years, that makes that net income look even worse. And if it was inflation adjusted, I wouldn't be surprised if it was actually negative. So we're all doing more to, frankly, keep less. And I mean, it really, really hits home to the idea of that you need proper planning to make sure that you're staying competitive and on top of what you're doing in your business. Now, technology is one piece of it, but looking at cost of goods sold, certain vendors, certain marketing channels, different consultants, everything really needs proper planning for each of the major phases of the company: the financial, the legal, the technology, the HR. And really at the core of it, IT has shifted to the center. There are only a few businesses that are not performing the bulk of what they do on some form of computer. Sure, there are trades companies that they actually go out there, get dirty, climb roofs, swing hammers, and sure, that's how their technology is not a crazy centerpiece for how they do business. Now, it still could be that maybe there's a lot of efficiency losses in a trades business, and it's something to think about. Well, maybe we should look at some type of resource management or planning system like Service Titan. But arguably, unless you are completely doing everything on pen and paper, IT is the infrastructure that powers the business, not a necessary evil cost. It's not a, I have to do email. It's more, this is what, I have to go out on the road. What's the most efficient and best way to do this? The other thing too in planning that I want to touch on, and a brief aside isn't talking about costs and revenues and things there, but we're at a really key point of turnover in the workforce with respect to retirements. There are a lot of key personnel with incredible experience and tribal knowledge that have one foot out the door. Now they're knocking on the door of 60, 65. Maybe their kids are having grandkids and they're starting to eye, being able to do childcare for them. Maybe there's, especially now in today's the first day that's not really going to give about 40 something. The first cold weather hits and they start turning an eye towards moving to Florida. Yeah, it's one important part in this planning is making sure you capture that key personnel's experience and knowledge and how they do things before they have to, before they make the decision to go. I know that we see it all the time with solo consultants retiring. There's hey, I had an IT guy, he retired, haven't found someone, now it's something that I need, and then it's really difficult to get a hold of the old IT guy. But frankly, every key position in a company can fall victim to the silver wave of retirement. It could be a marketing director who had all the relationships with the print houses and, knew the names and who to call. It could be a key salesperson who's Rolodex and had the relationships and had knew how to get into the golf tournaments. Anyone who's kind of on that cusp, you want to make sure that you're doing something to either shadow them or at least identify whoever their successor is. Arguably, I would say this is one of the biggest pieces if, it turns out, hey, everything runs really tight, but knowledge turnover is a big one. So you really want to cover and move. You want to make sure the knowledge is written down. Don't just verbally communicate it because, even if you identify a young successor, what if they stare down the barrel of how much responsibility they're going to take and all of a sudden they go, this is not for me. You want to make sure that it's written down. Continuity is the responsibility of leadership. I've learned this lesson the hard way a few times of, the leader has to be the one to make sure that there's turnover. You can't expect the employee to effectively train someone else for doing their job on top of doing their job. Again, documentation is resilience. It allows other people to step in. And then you got to identify and name the backup. Make it someone's responsibility of saying, hey, George, you are stepping in for Ryan. You're going to be the next key person for handling this process. But key part for planning, something to think about beyond technology. But getting back to the IT portion, let's go back to our regularly scheduled programming. But after you've already maybe thought about some of that planning, maybe some key personnel, you gotta start with, where do you go from here? Where am I? It's very difficult to plan and have an idea of what something should be if you don't really know where you are in the map. Sure, you want to get to the mountaintop, but what trailhead are you at? Are you halfway up the mountain? Are you 3/4 of the way up the mountain? Have you not even started climbing? In fact, you're walking away from the mountain. So you really need to take an inventory of the systems that you have, processes that you have, and the people that you have. You see the silver wave conversation before. So first thing you do is to perform a systems check. Hey, what tools do you have? Hint, check for recurring transactions on a monthly or yearly basis. What does that tool do? Okay, I see Adobe. What do I do with Adobe? I edit PDFs. Why do I edit PDFs? I edit PDFs for marketing cleanup. Hey, I see something for HeyGen. What does HeyGen do? HeyGen creates our video content. So, all right, it's part of the marketing channel. So, your profit and loss expenses category could be a great starting point for looking for some of those tool sets that might go beyond, what you're used to using every day. And then also if you see something and you look around and you go through that checklist, you go, oh my God, nobody ever uses this thing. Gives you a launching point. You also want to check your machines, your laptops, your servers, your desktops. Hey, what's out there in the fleet? How old are they? Are these 5-year-old machines? Are they 2-year-old machines, 3-year-old machines, 7-year-old machines? And hey, where are they? Hey, we were supposed to have a spare laptop. It was supposed to be here in the office. That's funny. There's an empty box where the spare laptop used to be. Who took it? Great point. And then, taking an inventory of your key data. What backups do you have? If that thing went down, where are you getting copies from? Do you have a copy of the IT documentation? Do you know where that's stored? Is it stored correctly in case it has a whole bunch of different passwords? You really just want to take an inventory of things around you and try and, I know we're all in busy season too, as we're ramping into the holidays, but really taking that time to stop, view this is incredibly important. And then also too, you want a checklist for the checklists. So chances are you have a lot of checklists. There are a lot of processes that you're probably doing, but you want to make sure that, hey, you're taking a look at them. Is there a written plan for how staff are onboarded and offboarded and for who gets access to what? Okay, we've got a new marketing person. Do they get access to the password vault? Is the password vault segmented that it goes only to our Facebook page, Instagram page, TikTok, etc.? How often are things double checked and who's cleared to wield a credit card? Is there maybe a credit card out there that shouldn't be out there? Do you have a checklist for making sure the systems are up to standards? Do you have something where failovers are tests and patches deployed? Some of this is just checking your IT company. Hey, when was the last time we did a fire drill? And then especially too, is there a written plan for restoring operations in case of disaster? Worst time to run a fire drill is when you're having a fire. So you'll want to make sure, hey, where am I supposed to go? Who am I supposed to call? Where is that documentation? And then another key part for your inventory, who's on the team? Which of course, thanks, Ryan. So who owns the IT, I should say outcomes instead of incomes. That's kind of funny. Who owns IT outcomes? Is it an internal stakeholder team? Is it an external team? Is there an internal person who's responsible for wrangling the external team? What does success actually look like? Is it a success that I'm not calling the help desk? Is success, hey, things happen, I call the help desk and I get help? When was the last time the provider initiated a review instead of a repair? Do you get those emails that say, hey, I need to get on your calendar? And then is your IT provider providing you that inventory of these are your machines, this is your firewalls, these are Microsoft licenses? And then especially too, is it mostly just, hey, I'm just fixing whatever's here and not really understanding the business priorities of like being in the office and looking and saying, hey, that spreadsheet that you have there that is your game plan for every day of the week, that's in Google Sheets and you're a Microsoft email system. So this is outside of your backup. So there's no way to recover that spreadsheet. How could, that's not good. So, do they understand, are they being able to see how the business operates and really get into the day-to-day? All right, so at this point, you should have an inventory. Some of the systems and licenses and assets and things. You've got some processes for how things should be done. I gave an example of some of those IT ones for onboarding, offboarding staff. Some of it could be, maybe there are certain programs or business line of applications that need really specific updates. And then obviously who has what, who's responsible for what. Also too, for, if we're looking at who's authorized for purchases, have you cleared hot all your employees to be able to buy their own computers? Maybe that's a good thing to control, especially for spend. But let's go ahead and start looking into 2026 for what we should be doing. So does the IT directly support the business goal for 2026? What if your business goal is, I'll pick an easy one. Maybe it is remove massive liability problems for the company. Is there a standard that the IT is going to be set up for being able to demonstrate a degree of compliance to help that liability? More likely than not, your IT is probably a business goal of, hey, let's generate more revenue. Maybe we're looking at a 10% growth. And in order to have a 10% growth, we need to be able to hire 2 people. So, how can those 2 people quickly get access to information and systems to be able to start revenue generating activities? So are things set up in the IT world to be able to allow that scale of staff to be able to perform more revenue? If you doubled in size, if you snapped your fingers and all of a sudden the number of folks working the front lines doubled, would the systems handle it? If you're using QuickBooks and maybe you're using an outdated version of QuickBooks and it keeps crashing, is that a good idea? Especially if 2 people now need to, work in that QuickBooks. Or maybe, hey, this thing gets slow and it's fine when, we were getting 8 requests a day, but if we're getting 16 to 24 requests, that downtime is really starting to harm our ability to get this work out the door. And then especially too, can automation or AI be leveraged? Are the systems set up in such a way that, being able to, enable AI is really just giving it the training parameters the same way you'd treat an intern or another person rather than crap. It turns out that the process is in that repository. The client data is in that repository. The outbound communications is in that repository. And I haven't and there are no permissions that allow these to talk to each other. Or worse yet, maybe you have an AI and then all of a sudden it turns into a monster to feed by giving it manual information rather than just pulling it automatically. Is this adding more for folks to do or actually getting you appropriate efficiencies? Now, these are the nice things. These are the goal things. But I also did mention briefly about the business goals that, one of the key parts for making sure that you take 2 steps forward is that you don't take 3 steps back. And some of that is the ability of, can you recover from a ransomware attack in 24 hours? Something hits and everything gets locked up. Are you able to come back in a short time frame? Are the appropriate protections in place or cyber insurance in place to meet any liability obligations you might have to your clients or your employees? And if you touch any of the fun stuff, financial information, health information, social security numbers, those can get really nasty really quickly. And to the right of boom is not the time to try and figure out that you should have had, maybe I really should have been more hardcore about enforcing multi-factor on the email, something like that. And then also too, is staff trained to spot phishing attacks? Still 85% attacks start with the business email compromise. And so the staff have to stay appropriately vigilant to spot when something's coming in that doesn't look right. So we had the 2 steps forward. This is the avoiding 3 steps back. And now to that point of trying to keep more in your pocket. What percentage of the IT spending, if you go into your QuickBooks, you pull that chart of account, how much is planned or reactive? Are you buying computers because, Sally had a laptop and there went the coffee and I had to buy, a reactive laptop, or, I was going to try this 6-year-old laptop I was going to try and ride out and, it's just not hitting the mark, or, I went to Best Buy and bought this machine and it didn't have the specs. And it was and I wasn't able to return it. And so now I have to buy a whole other one. How much is sitting down and being planned is saying, okay, I know I have these machines that are, up for retirement this year. This firewall, this operating system needs an update. Hey, how many more staff are coming on? Plan to hire 3. When are we hiring them? How soon do we need a lot of the machines ahead of time? Also for hiring, double checking duplicate licenses, dormant subscriptions, or redundant services. I mean, this honestly is a really fast place to be able to improve the bottom line, but definitely requires a careful watch because almost all software vendors are now annual subscriptions, and chances are it doesn't line up with the calendar. Chances are it's probably in the middle of the year, but it's good to catch it. Double check if you have an Adobe license in use for someone who doesn't work there anymore and you're going to hire someone, and that way you don't have to buy a whole nother license. You can repurpose it. And this is, a really key part for being able to say, hey, let's save some immediate dollars month to month. And I've seen some companies scrub $300, $400 a month with respect to this, which can really make a material difference. Then especially too, if an opportunity arose to automate the core part of your business, is the capacity there to do so? So some of that is a financial control is, let's say, ChatGPT comes out with OpenAI comes out with a whiz-bang agent, or maybe, if I use my own example, Synchro, our ticketing system, comes out with a whiz-bang AI option for doing frontline tickets, but it says, hey, it's a $10,000 setup fee and $1,500 a month monthly after that. But hey, that replaces 2 to 3 technicians worth of work based on what you're looking at. Do I have enough cash to be able to make that investment in the business if the opportunity arose, and for me to be able to stay competitive with the rest of the industry? So that's a good thing to review as well, of besides just taking money off the table, where can you make investments? And then the most important part, all these ideas are fantastic. They're great.
Hmm.
Plenty of things to really take home, but it's useless without some form of accountability. Who owns technology performance in the organization? Even if it's an MSP, you are almost certainly one of multiple clients. And if that's the case, who in your organization, if it's you, the owner, that's fine. How are you going to hold that performance accountable? And if you're wondering, like, oh, well, how do I do that? A good way to do it, frankly, is also asking those AI pretty much strictly that question. You tell a little bit about yourself, you know, say that you're trying to hold them accountable, and what question should I be asking them and how often should I ask it? And frankly, this should also be kind of going on already with any of those regular reviews. Some folks are good for quarterly, some semi-annual, some annual. Depends on your size. So all depends. And then for whoever is holding that accountable, do they have real authority to act? Can they actually make decisions? Do they have the ability that if a current provider's not, holding up to snuff, that they can go out and try and find a new one? Can they spend money? Is it hey, I'm responsible for IT outcomes, and some of that is, Sally's laptop's 5 years old. She's having a lot of performance problems. She needs a new one. It's just underpowered and the thing's been through the ringer. Do they have to then go and ask somebody else to try and wait for spending and say, I don't really want to spend $1,000 for Sally's new laptop. But Sally's been so unproductive because she's restarting her laptop 3 times a day. So you can see how that person can be stuck in the middle for not having the power to be able to carry out the IT incomes because they don't have the ability to release dollars to fix it. And then also too, just getting insights and recommendations, or are you just getting that invoice, said, hey, I remember one IT provider mentioning of, hey, selling protections is almost like selling elephant repellents. Have you seen any elephants in the past quarter?
Yeah.
No, awesome. But it's, but, there should be other things looking for, is your current provider reviewing those licenses for saying, hey, 19 Adobe licenses and you have 16 staff. Hey, you got these Microsoft licenses. We saw this many tickets. That this shows us that there's a lot going on because your ticket hours are really high. Are you, frankly, again, are you getting those technology business meetings? So really the roadmap, it all starts with those regular reviews about the health of your system, the uptime, tickets, employee satisfaction. Is anything wrong? That rhythm should keep going, and that should be between whoever owns those IT outcomes and whoever is the IT provider. A hardware refresh budget. Hey, plan to refresh a machine so you can do it at your leisure rather than have it force the issue that the machine can smell you have a deadline and decides to crash then and there. Also, too, security testing. Run a phishing simulation or a basic pen test to see how current protections handle it. Hey, if somebody clicks on a link in an email, what's the worst that can happen? What could they get? And then at a really high level, for those who are a little more mature, run a tabletop exercise to simulate a disaster. Hey, I'm gonna keep picking on the fake Sally. Sally's at a ransomware event. She clicked on the email and the ransomware started. And of course, it hit the database that held client information, held some social security numbers. All right, do people know where to find the phone number for the PR? Do we know the phone number for the insurance company? Running that tabletop exercise. Is that scheduled? Because those tabletop exercises might be a day, might be a half day. And so that's not something you really schedule a week or two out. That's something you probably want either annual, semi-annual. Maybe it's attached to a mid-year offsite for the company. But those are the more kind of mature ones. But I hope that helps for giving a little bit of a roadmap for what to do in 2026 for your IT. Again, you start with an inventory. Where are you? Are you having those regular meetings? Do you know what machines do you have? Do you know what licenses you have? Do you know what you're spending? And then for 2026, are there any key personnel who are going to depart that, they're getting close? And we should maybe start having more junior employee or a new employee start to tail them. Is there for other processes written down for how to do things that help with that staff turnover? And then for again getting more robust, can you run a tabletop exercise? Are there folks identified who have responsibilities, or is it more Hey, this stuff is an afterthought. I have an MSP and they just take care of it. It's like, sure, they take care of a lot, but the worst time to find out is like, I thought you were taking care of that is when something bad happens and goes like, no, we're not backing up every workstation because you turned down the $20 per machine per month cost. Thought we talked about this, but if you need help with your IT plan, we're more than happy to give you a closer look and book a 15-minute discovery call with us, systemsupport.com/discovery call.